You have now entered a podcast show. A podcast show that you can listen to. A podcast show that talks about movies that you have either enjoyed, disliked, or a bit of both. A podcast show that has entered a month full of surprises, dark moments, and the scariest a bunch to come in the month of October. This month, this podcast show is about to go to the dark side of movies, depending on the genre. You've just entered Codo's Cinema Horror Month. Good afternoon, and welcome to an episode of Codo's Cinema, the podcast show where I talk about movies. I'm your host, the man, the horror, the legend, Mark Codo, and I bid you welcome. Well, when it comes to horror movies, we think back to the classic horror films that we used to watch, and I'm not talking about the ones from today. I'm talking about the ones from back then. You know, like from the 1920s, 30s, 60s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, those years, you know? And it doesn't matter if we grew up with these horror films or not. And for the record, and just to be clear, for the record, I'm not really much into horror films, but that doesn't mean I don't watch them. I mean, true, yeah, there's probably a few horror films I watched down the line, but I'm pretty sure many people saw the original classic monster movies, other horror films like The Exorcist, Silence of the Lambs, Nightmare on Elm Street, you name them. And many of these horror films live up to the expectation of the audience, or some that live up to not scare the audience, but to entertain the audience as well. So not just to scare them, but to entertain the audience, because audiences think these horror films are very entertaining and scary, yeah. But in all honesty, there are some classic horror films that don't really live up to the scare as many people predicted. You know, like Friday the 13th and The Omen, many other films too. But in later years, though, many people started to reappreciate these horror classics because of how well the films are made and the pop culture of it all. So there is a silver lining. In today's horror films, they range between pretty good and not so much. I mean, granted, there are some good exceptions of modern-day horror films, so, hey, it's something. But that doesn't mean the films don't scare. They do have a few good moments of horrifying moments. But enough about that. What I'm trying to say is, I have seen films that I enjoyed and remembered. In fact, I got two horror films on my list today that I'm going to single out, and that is Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and Stephen King's The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick. Normally, I would single out one film from the horror genre, but sometimes it's the best of both worlds. Psycho and The Shining are considered to be two of the greatest horror films of all time. Plus, Psycho came out in 1960, and The Shining came out in 1980, which means one thing. Can you guess what it is? Nope. Well, I'll tell you. Both films have something in common for an anniversary. And the reason why is that today I want to honor the 60th anniversary of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and the 40th anniversary of The Shining. So, in a special Codo's Cinema Horror Month episode, I want to look back into these films, not, basically as reviews, but like a blast from the past. So consider this a double movie review today. So let's talk about two of the greatest horror films of all time. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and The Shining. And as always, spoiler alert. Let me start off with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Psycho came out in 1960, which marks the 60th anniversary for what is known to be as Hitchcock's masterpiece. And going into the film follows Marion Crane as she is on the run from stealing $40,000 in cash, no really, $40,000 in cash, to California. Unfortunately, Marion is being followed by a police officer and she decides to trade her car in for a different one. There is also a moment where the police officer gives a very suspicious look towards Marion as he drives away, knowing that something is up. And I'm pretty sure I know what you're talking about. By the way, we also do get an Alfred Hitchcock cameo in the opening of the film. Basically, he does that in almost all of his films. While driving, Marion is caught in a rainstorm and stops at a motel where she meets Norman Bates, played by Anthony Perkins. And by the way, Marion Crane is played by Janet Leigh. So, Marion accepts Norman's invitation to spend the night at the motel, only for Norman to be yelled at by his mother. And the only time we see the mother on screen is basically, well, actually, we do see her a lot on screen, but like more in a shadow form, like a silhouette. We do get a very interesting conversation between Norman and Marion, where Norman tells Marion about his life with his mother, who is mentally ill, and he is forbid by his mother to have a life apart from her. This scene alone does go into a little bit of a hint of what Norman Bates is going to be like for the rest of the film, particularly the ending. I also like the moment where she is surrounded by the birds, like they are hanging up on the wall, and the fact that that they mentioned that Marion eats like a bird does give in a good connection as well, because also the fact that she is surrounded by birds up in the wall during the conversation scene with Norman. And of course, after that conversation, we also get the famous shower scene where a shadowy figure who looks like Mrs. Bates kills Marion, and then Norman cleans up the mess by dragging Marion's body to a swamp with $40,000 in cash and the car in the swamp. By the way, FYI, the shower scene is definitely one of the greatest moments in any cinema history for horror films. Lila, or am I saying this correctly? Lila, Marion's sister, hasn't seen Marion in a while and decides to open an investigation. Lila sends private investigator Milton Arbogast to check out the Bates motel, only for Arbogast to be killed by the shadowy figure of Mrs. Bates. By the way, we do get the music from Bernard Herrmann throughout a few moments of this film, particularly the shower scene, though. Lila and Sam went to the Bates motel to see Mr. Arbogast, even though he wasn't there. Sam sees Mrs. Bates in the window, but she ignores him. However, Lila heard from the police that Mrs. Bates died a few years ago, and Arbogast only went for the $40,000 and Marion Crane. Lila goes inside the Bates house to look for Mrs. Bates, only to find a skeleton corpse in the basement. This was in the basement, by the way, of the Bates motel. And then, out of nowhere, out from behind and nowhere, Norman Bates with a wig, robe, and the theme song along with the string instruments, where Norman Bates comes out as the psychopath that we all know, and yeah, basically that's the point. So basically, towards the end of the film, don't worry, Sam knocks out Norman Bates. According to the psychiatrist in court at the end of the film, it turns out that Norman Bates killed his mother, including 2 young girls. We also get a spooky quote from the mother voiceover about the murders that Norman has done in the past, which is definitely one of the creepiest moments of any film history. And the film ends with the car being towed from the swamp. And that was pretty much the end of Psycho. Pretty scary movie, right? Yep, I'm pretty sure it was. And Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho is considered to be one of Hitchcock's masterpieces. At the time of its release, many people were split with the film due to its depiction of sexuality and violence, along with the controversial movie poster where Alfred Hitchcock puts in a no-late policy for the film's opening night release. Really? You had to put that in there? Well, kind of makes sense, but I don't know. Psycho is also the first film in the mainstream media to ever use someone flushing the toilet. And that was actually the point. They actually did that in the film, where a character actually flushes the toilet in the mainstream. That literally takes a lot to handle, to have that be put in the film. Thankfully, the film is a masterpiece of horror, despite the film being more suspense than horror, given other Hitchcock's films like Vertigo, North by Northwest, and Strangers on the Train, including The Birds, that is saying something. Besides, Alfred Hitchcock is known as the master of suspense, so that is definitely something. And despite the mixed reviews, despite that, the film was reappraised later on, and as I mentioned, one of the greatest horror films of all time, and being Hitchcock's masterpiece. On top of that, the film is widely remembered for the famous shower scene where Janet Leigh's character Marion Crane is taking a shower for the night at the Bates Motel when a mysterious shadow figure comes up from behind, opens the shower curtain, and stabs her. The music by Bernard Herrmann goes full on, thanks to the string players playing the famous kill theme for this scene. The editing in this scene goes back and forth with the stabbing, plus the blood that was dripping down the bathtub of the shower is basically chocolate syrup, which pretty much fits the black and white coloring for this film. Especially of how the blood is going down the drain as the scene cuts to a dissolved transition from Marion Crane's eye to the window where the audience sees the Bates house, and Norman Bates from the background of the house saying like she sees his mother covered in blood after the stabbing. Want more of horror? Well, how about The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick and based on a novel by Stephen King? And this film, The Shining, came out in 1980, which marks its 40th anniversary. The film follows Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, who is a writer and a recovering alcoholic who took a position as a caretaker at the Overlook Hotel. Jack brings his wife and son Wendy and Danny Torrance, played by Shelley Duvall and Danny Lloyd, to spend the winter time over there. While at the Overlook Hotel, Danny comes in contact with a hotel manager named Richard Halloran, played by Scatman Crothers, who seems to have a good connection about the Overlook Hotel being haunted. This also goes into detail with Danny as he possesses the Shining, which basically the saying goes with Halloran. Furthermore, Danny rides his bike around the hotel with some amazing camera movements and cinematography, by the way. Pretty much one of the few good things in this film. As Danny comes across two identical twin girls who ask him to come play. Come play with us, Danny. Yep, that was definitely the moments in that film. Oh boy, yep, you're definitely seeing double in this film. It turns out that the girls were killed by an original caretaker a long time ago before Danny ever set foot into the hotel. Especially in the moment where Danny, while being possessed by the Shining, sees it's like seeing things, like if he was seeing dead people or anything, and boy was that scary. Like we see the twins standing out in the hallway, and then it literally cuts to the kill zone of the twins. Like literally, that is so scary. Oh my, that is literally scary. Danny freaks out about this too. Oh man, oh boy, yeah, that is pretty scary. Oh my goodness. In fact, the hotel had a previous winter caretaker who went insane and killed his family and himself. After a winter storm leaves the Torrances snowbound, Jack's sanity deteriorates due to the influence of the supernatural forces that inhabit the hotel. This makes Jack go into a writing meltdown where he writes all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. One of the few quotes in this film that was actually probably one of the few memorable quotes or something. This sanity placed his wife and son in danger, especially in one conversation where Jack and Wendy are seen arguing with each other while Wendy has gone full on stress and scared with a bat in her hand, ready to knock Jack out. FYI, that bat scene that Wendy took was shot 127 times by Stanley Kubrick. And no, I'm not kidding. That scene alone with the bat and Wendy's hands took 127 takes. I'm not even kidding. There's an entire behind the scenes footage of that. Well, actually not really, even though they They actually kind of mentioned it somewhere down the line, but there is actually behind the scenes footage of the making of The Shining. So yeah, that's pretty much. Wendy, and by the way, Wendy does knock out Jack. Wendy drags Jack's body towards the fridge to lock him up, and Wendy goes upstairs to her room where she falls asleep. Danny, on the other hand, being possessed by The Shining, goes into a zombie-like mood, saying red rum. Danny takes the red lipstick and draws it on the door, writing red rum, and during the line red rum, Wendy wakes up to that and sees it on the door. In fact, red rum is reversed as murder. Yep, I'm pretty sure you know what red rum means. Out of nowhere, Jack comes out of the fridge from a bartender who is now a spirit, grabs an axe, and goes on a rampage to hunt down Wendy and Danny. Jack breaks down the front door to the room, and he says this line, "Wendy, I'm home." Yep, you know that line. Wendy and Danny went to the bathroom to lock up and tried to escape through a window, only for Danny to fit through the window, but Wendy could not. And then the Joker himself knocks on the door by doing a Three Little Pigs quote. Little pigs, let me come in. Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin. Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in." Jack breaks down the door with his axe, causing Wendy to scream in horror. After breaking the door, Jack says this line, "Here's Johnny!" And then Wendy slices his hand with a carving knife. Yep, that definitely hurt. Wendy runs out of the bathroom to catch up with Danny, but she sees ghosts in the hotel. And then the elevator full of blood spilling all on the carpet towards the hallway. My goodness, is that gory. Jack runs outside to catch up with Danny through a snow maze. And even though he does struggle to catch up with Danny due to the weather, and surprisingly, Danny makes it out of the maze and makes it to his mom, Wendy. Danny and Wendy escape the hotel, but Jack is left behind, freezing himself to death in the maze. Definitely one of the scariest moments in the film where Jack is frozen. Yep, he is definitely frozen. The film ends with a camera zoom where the camera zooms in on a picture of members of the Overlook Hotel from the past, and we see Jack Torrance as one of the members. And by the way, that is inside the hotel, by the way. And that is The Shining. Yep, pretty scary movie, am I right? Upon its release, The Shining received mixed reviews. The ultimate critic that took issue with The Shining, and this is pretty obvious, is author Stephen King. He despised the treatment of how Stanley Kubrick handled the film, and basically the deviation from the original source material. Stephen King hated Kubrick's take on the film so much, he even went on to make another film for TV, and I'm pretty sure we know how that went down. If the criticism wasn't bad enough, then Stanley Kubrick's treatment with Shelley Duvall is another behind-the-scenes story. Actress Shelley Duvall did not get along with Kubrick, and they both would get into arguments frequently about the lines in the script, her acting techniques, and the numerous other things that are going on. Especially the part where Kubrick tells the crew to not sympathize with Shelley Duvall. Yep, that is probably a red flag up in the air. Duvall was so stressed of her role that she became physically ill for months and began to lose hair. The bat scene, as I mentioned, that Shelley Duvall did, Kubrick did 127 takes. And I'm not kidding, 127 takes. Sam Raimi would break Stanley Kubrick's record in the first Spider-Man film, where Peter Parker was rescuing Mary Jane Watson from tripping onto the floor after a spilled orange juice on the floor where she slips on. But unfortunately, the scene alone was not used with CGI. They actually went for real, where they actually catch the food up in the air. And by the way, no CGI. That was actually used for real. So technically practical, but for real, in 150 takes. Hey, no one was complaining about that in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man rather than The Shining. So, how about that, Stanley Kubrick? So, and the shooting script for The Shining was being changed constantly, sometimes several days at a time, adding more stress. Jack Nicholson would eventually become so frustrated with the ever-changing script that he would throw away copies of the script that the production team had given him to memorize. Yep, that is another red flag in the air, knowing that it was going to change anyway. Well, Nicholson learned most of his lines just minutes before filming them, so bright spot, I guess. In later years, though, The Shining was reappraised, and many people consider it to be one of the greatest and scariest horror movies of all time. And that's pretty much it. In the past 40 and 60 years, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and The Shining are some of the greatest horror movies of all time. Despite their original release issues and behind-the-scenes issues, both films managed to grab people's attention through amazing storytelling, performances, and moments that'll make you scare. And hey, it will continue throughout pop culture as well. And that pretty much wraps up my take on Psycho and The Shining for its 40th and 60th anniversary. Are there any other things that I missed out when I was talking about these films? Did I miss out on anything? Please let me know. And if you guys have your opinions on these films, hey, feel free to tell me. Thank you for tuning into Codo Cinema. I'm your host, Mark Codo. Remember to watch movies, stay positive, and good night. Until next week.